A shocking display of racial profiling turns into an unexpected moment of honor. The manager's finger hovers over the emergency button as suspicion clouds judgment. What happens next will challenge everything we think we know about prejudice and redemption. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. John Smith adjusted his designer tie as he scanned the bank lobby from behind his mahogany desk. The manager of American Community Bank in downtown Chicago had built his 15-year career on what he called his exceptional ability to read people. His colleagues often praised this self-proclaimed talent, reinforcing his belief that he could assess a customer's financial worthiness within seconds. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, highlighting the polished marble floors and a line of customers waiting for the tellers. John's attention shifted as the glass doors swung open. A black woman in faded jeans and a simple gray hoodie entered, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the floor. She approached his desk with quiet confidence that somehow irritated him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone already dismissive, as she sat across from his immaculate desk. The woman placed a black leather portfolio on the edge, her movements deliberate and composed. The bank manager's skepticism was immediately palpable. The other customers sensed the shift in atmosphere, conversations dying down as they glanced toward the interaction unfolding. Maria Davis, the young teller behind the bulletproof glass, paused mid-transaction, her eyes aching nervously between her computer and the manager's desk. "I'd like to discuss a business loan," the woman stated simply. John's eyebrows shot up. He pointed at her with icy authority, his manicured finger aimed like a weapon. "Empty your pockets, please," he demanded loudly enough for everyone to hear. The request was unnecessary, inappropriate even, but he made it anyway. The lobby fell silent. Mrs. Helen Miller, an elderly customer filling out a deposit slip, looked up in surprise. Michael Brown, the security guard stationed by the door, shifted uncomfortably, his military training evident in his straight posture as he observed the situation with growing concern. The woman didn't move, her expression remaining neutral despite the humiliation being orchestrated. With theatrical precision, John reached for the hand sanitizer on his desk and squeezed a generous amount into his palms. He rubbed them together slowly, the smell of alcohol cutting through the air. "People like you," he murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "don't just walk in asking for millions." His emphasis on "people like you" hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Robert Johnson, the assistant manager at the next desk, looked down at his paperwork, pretending not to notice. The woman's fingers remained steady on her portfolio, her dignity intact, despite the public degradation unfolding in the heart of downtown Chicago. Dr. Angela Brown met his gaze with unwavering calm, her hands folded neatly over a black leather portfolio that contained everything she needed. Unlike the other customers who seemed to shrink under John's scrutiny, she maintained perfect posture, her expression betraying nothing of what she might be feeling inside. "Is there a problem with my application?" she asked, her voice steady and measured. John Smith exchanged a knowing glance with Robert Johnson, who hovered nervously at his side. The assistant manager's discomfort was evident, but he forced a smile that matched his superior's condescending tone. "Let me guess," John said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "You want that $2.3 million business loan? For what exactly? A hair salon? A soul food restaurant?" Several patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Maria watched from behind her teller window, her fingers frozen over her keyboard. The young woman bit her lip, clearly torn between her paycheck and her conscience. Angela's phone buzzed on the desk between them. The screen illuminated briefly with Treasury Department before she calmly pressed the decline button and returned the device to her purse. "I believe all the required documentation is in order," she replied, tapping the portfolio with one manicured finger. "The Community Development Fund application clearly states—" "I know what it states," John interrupted, leaning back in his chair. "I've been managing this branch for 11 years. I think I understand how loans work." Robert nodded eagerly beside him. "Perhaps something smaller would be more appropriate for your situation," he suggested, his voice betraying his nervousness. The digital clock above the teller windows glowed 2:47 in the afternoon. The bank would close at 4, giving Angela just over an hour to complete her business. Outside, Chicago's downtown bustled with the usual weekday activity, people rushing past the large glass windows oblivious to the tension building inside. "I'd prefer to discuss the application I submitted," Angela said, maintaining her composure despite the public humiliation unfolding. She was aware of the eyes on her, the elderly Mrs. Miller watching with concern from the waiting area, Michael Brown shifting his weight by the entrance, his security uniform crisped but his expression troubled. John's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I'm trying to save you some embarrassment here. The kind of collateral required for a loan of that size." He trailed off, shaking his head as if explaining something to a child. "Perhaps we should discuss what you actually qualify for, rather than waste any more time." The compliance officer remained unmoved, her patience seemingly boundless as the bank manager continued his performance for the growing audience. John Smith's voice escalated to a theatrical pitch, ensuring every customer in the marble-floored lobby could hear his disdain. His polished shoes clicked against the floor as he circled his desk, waving Angela's application forms in the air like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "You know what kind of collateral a $2.3 million business loan requires," he announced, his tone dripping with condescension. "We don't give out millions to just anyone walking in off the street." The bank manager's eyes swept across the room seeking validation from other customers as he performed his authority. Dr. Angela Brown remained perfectly still, her hands resting on her black leather portfolio. Not a muscle in her face betrayed emotion as John continued his public humiliation campaign. "This isn't some government handout program," he scoffed, dramatically flipping through her online forms. "These papers might as well be lottery tickets for the amount of chance you have." His laughter echoed against the high ceilings, inviting others to join his mockery. Across the lobby, Zoe Johnson had already positioned herself against a marble column, her smartphone held at chest level. The 17-year-old student had begun live streaming the moment John's voice first rose. Her young face reflected both shock and determination as she captured every word, every dismissive gesture. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered to her device, angling it to keep both the manager and Angela in frame. The view count ticked upward, 20, 50, then over 100 people watching in real time. Comments began flooding the stream's chat. "Is this really happening?" wrote one viewer. "Someone call the news," demanded another. "This is straight-up discrimination," a third comment flashed across Zoe's screen. The teenager shifted her weight, careful to remain inconspicuous while documenting the scene. She noticed Maria Davis behind the teller window, the young employee's face twisted with discomfort, as her boss continued his tirade. "Community Development Fund for Minority-Owned Businesses," John read aloud from Angela's application, his voice mockingly incredulous. He tossed the papers onto his desk. "That's ambitious for someone like you." Angela's phone vibrated briefly on the desk between them, but she made no move to check it, her focus unwavering despite the public spectacle John was creating. Zoe's live stream viewer count jumped again, 200, 300 people now watching. The comments section became a torrent of outrage, with viewers demanding the bank's name and location. One comment stood out: "Someone needs to get this to the Chicago Tribune right now." The high school student steadied her hand, determined to capture every second of what was quickly becoming a viral moment of injustice unfolding in downtown Chicago. Behind the bulletproof glass of her telestation, Maria Davis watched the scene unfold with a knot forming in her stomach. The 24-year-old had only been working at American Community Bank for 7 months, and she desperately needed this job to cover her mounting student loans. Yet the injustice playing out just 3 feet away made her fingers tremble as she mechanically counted bills for an elderly customer. John Smith's voice carried across the marble floor as he continued to interrogate Dr. Brown. Maria caught the eye of another teller who quickly looked away, unwilling to acknowledge what they were both witnessing. The young woman's conscience warred with her practical needs. Her rent was due next week, and her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. "Would you like a receipt?" she asked her customer mechanically, her attention still fixed on the confrontation. Maria considered what might happen if she spoke up. Would she be fired on the spot? Would John turn his condescension toward her next? The thought made her stomach churn. Across the lobby, Michael Brown adjusted his security uniform and shifted his weight from one foot to another. The veteran had seen plenty during his 2 tours overseas, but something about this situation triggered his finely tuned instincts. He studied Dr. Angela Brown with professional interest, noting her composed demeanor and unwavering gaze. There was something oddly familiar about the woman, not her face specifically, but her bearing. Michael had encountered high-ranking officials during his military service, and this woman carried herself with the same quiet authority. Her patience seemed almost tactical, as if she were allowing events to unfold according to some predetermined plan. The security guard moved slightly closer, ostensibly checking the nearby exit door but actually positioning himself to better observe the interaction. In his 3 years working security at the bank, he'd never seen John treat anyone with such blatant disrespect. Yet the woman showed no signs of intimidation or distress, unusual for someone being publicly humiliated. Michael caught Maria's troubled gaze from behind her glass partition. The teller looked away quickly, but not before he recognized the conflict in her eyes. He understood her predicament all too well. The choice between standing up for what's right and protecting your livelihood was rarely an easy one. As John's voice grew louder, Michael's hand instinctively moved toward his radio. Something told him this situation wasn't what it appeared to be, and his years of training had taught him to trust those instincts. The woman's composure wasn't just remarkable, it was deliberate, and that made him wonder exactly who Dr. Angela Brown really was. Undeterred by the growing attention, John Smith continued his performance with theatrical disdain. He flipped through Angela's application with exaggerated skepticism, his manicured fingers lingering on certain pages as if finding invisible flaws. Community Development Fund? For minority-owned businesses? That's ambitious, he sneered, deliberately raising his voice to ensure everyone in the marble-floored lobby could hear. The bank manager seemed oblivious to the rising number of phones pointed in his direction, including Zoe's live stream that was steadily gaining viewers. "Do you understand the requirements for this level of financing?" John asked, leaning forward across his immaculate desk. "Most applicants come with established portfolios, decades of business history." His emphasis on most applicants carried a weight of implication that hung in the air. Dr. Angela Brown sat perfectly still, her hands resting calmly on her black leather portfolio. Her expression remained neutral despite the public humiliation unfolding. The senior compliance officer had clearly weathered storms before. Her composure seemed unbreakable, a stark contrast to the bank manager's increasingly theatrical performance. "Robert," John called to his assistant, "could you bring me the rejection form template?" He didn't lower his voice as he added, "These people always aim too high. They hear about government programs and think money grows on trees." Robert Johnson hurried over, visibly uncomfortable with his boss's behavior. The junior manager kept his eyes down, avoiding Angela's gaze as he handed over the requested paperwork. His hands trembled slightly, betraying his internal conflict about participating in this spectacle. From her position behind the counter, Maria watched with growing unease. The young teller caught Mrs. Miller's eye across the lobby, both women sharing a silent moment of distress at what they were witnessing. Michael, the security guard, had positioned himself closer to the desk, his military training evident in his alert stance and watchful eye. Throughout the ordeal, Angela adjusted her portfolio slightly, causing it to fall open just enough that the edge of a black Centurion card became visible, the exclusive credit card reserved for the highest-tier clients, requiring millions in annual spending. The small detail went unnoticed by John, who continued his dismissive assessment, but Michael's trained eye caught the glimpse of the rare card. The security guard's expression shifted subtly as pieces began falling into place in his mind. He'd seen such cards only a handful of times in his career, and never in the possession of someone being treated with such disrespect. As John continued his tirade about realistic expectations, Michael maintained his professional demeanor while reassessing everything about the situation unfolding before him. The live stream on Zoe Johnson's smartphone had already attracted over 1,000 viewers. Comments flooded the screen faster than the 17-year-old could process them, each ping representing another witness to the uncomfortable scene unfolding at American Community Bank. John Smith leaned forward across his immaculate desk, his voice dripping with false concern. "Look, I'm just trying to save you some embarrassment here," he said, eyes narrowing at Dr. Angela Brown. "This bank deals in reality, not charity cases. Perhaps a smaller institution might be more appropriate for your situation." The bank manager's words carried across the marble lobby, deliberately loud enough for other customers to hear. Several people shifted uncomfortably in the waiting area, exchanging glances as the tension thickened. From the corner near the safety deposit boxes, Miss Helen Miller clutched her handbag tighter. The elderly woman had been banking at this branch since 1983, her silver hair and pearl necklace marking her as one of the institution's most valued clients. After watching the interaction for several minutes, she could no longer remain silent. "Excuse me," Mrs. Miller called out, her voice wavering slightly with age but firm with conviction. "Is this really necessary? Couldn't you discuss this matter privately?" She gestured toward the small conference room where sensitive discussions typically took place. The bank manager's expression hardened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Mrs. Miller, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you we're following standard procedures." "It doesn't seem standard to me," the elderly customer persisted, adjusting her glasses. "I've never seen an applicant treated this way in all my years here." John straightened his tie, clearly irritated by the interruption. "With all due respect, Mrs. Miller, we have protocols in place for a reason." His voice took on an authoritative edge as he addressed the entire lobby. "We have to protect our legitimate customers from potential fraud." The word fraud hung in the air, rippling through the lobby like a live wire. Several customers visibly recoiled, and Maria Davis, the young teller behind the bulletproof glass, looked down at her keyboard, unable to watch. Angela remained perfectly still, her hands resting on her black leather portfolio, her expression revealing nothing as John continued his performance. The only indication of her awareness of the growing spectacle was a slight tightening around her eyes as she observed Mrs. Miller's intervention. Michael Brown, the security guard, shifted his weight from one foot to another, his military training evident in his posture as he assessed the escalating situation. His hand moved unconsciously toward his radio, though he hadn't yet decided if intervention was necessary. Angela's phone vibrated against the polished desk surface for the third time in 15 minutes, the screen illuminated with FBI Special Agent Carter prominently displayed. Without breaking her composed demeanor, Dolan declined the call with a subtle swipe of her thumb, redirecting her full attention to the increasingly uncomfortable situation before her. The bank's marble lobby had grown unusually quiet. Even the typical clicking of keyboards and hushed conversations had ceased as everyone strained to hear the exchange. Angela adjusted her position slightly, her leather portfolio remaining perfectly centered on her lap. "Sir, I think there's a misunderstanding about my qualifications," she stated evenly, her voice carrying just enough authority to command respect without aggression. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across John Smith's increasingly flushed face. The bank manager leaned forward, his expensive tie dangling over Angela's paperwork. His lips curled into what he likely believed was a knowing smile, but appeared more as a contemptuous sneer to everyone watching. "You probably heard about some government program giving out loans to people who can't pay them back and figured you'd try your luck," John replied, his voice dripping with condescension. He glanced sideways toward his assistant Robert, seeking validation with a smirk that the younger man reluctantly returned. From her position behind the bulletproof glass, Maria Davis gripped her pen tightly, knuckles whitening. The teller's stomach churned as she recognized the familiar pattern. She'd seen John treat other minority applicants with similar disdain, though never quite this blatantly. $2.3 million is substantial, John continued, tapping the application form with his manicured finger. "These programs are designed for qualified applicants with proper business experience and substantial collateral." Angela remained perfectly still, her breathing measured and controlled. The Centurion card peeked slightly from her portfolio as she shifted it, though John was too focused on his performance to notice this telling indicator of her financial status. Across the lobby, Michael Brown's military training kicked in as he assessed the situation. The security guard recognized the telltale signs of someone with authority: Angela's posture, her calm under pressure, her strategic patience. His instincts told him there was more to this woman than John Smith could possibly understand. "Perhaps if we reviewed my documentation thoroughly," Angela suggested, her tone remaining professional despite the public humiliation being inflicted upon her. John waved dismissively. "I've seen enough to make an assessment. People in your situation often overestimate their qualifications." Angela's phone buzzed once more. Agent Carter again, but she simply turned it to silent mode. Whatever federal business required her attention would have to wait. The matter unfolding before her demanded her complete focus, and she was determined to see it through to its inevitable conclusion. John Smith towered over Dr. Angela Brown, his 6-foot frame deliberately positioned to cast a shadow across her seated figure. The bank manager's body language screamed intimidation, shoulders squared, chin tilted downward, eyes narrowed. Yet Angela's expression remained remarkably composed, her hands still resting calmly on her leather portfolio. "We actually verify information here," he boasted, waving her paperwork dismissively in the air. "This isn't some corner store handing out credit to anyone who walks in." His voice carried across the marble-floored lobby, ensuring everyone could hear his performance of authority. Angela maintained eye contact, neither shrinking back nor rising to the bait. The slight arch of her eyebrow was the only indication that his words had registered at all. Her composure seemed to irritate John further, as though her refusal to be intimidated was itself a challenge to his position. Michael Brown observed the interaction from his post near the entrance, his military-honed instincts on high alert. The security guard recognized the familiar signs of escalation, the manager's increasingly aggressive posture, the hushed murmurs of uncomfortable customers, the tension crackling through the air like static electricity. He'd seen similar situations during his service years, moments before conflict erupted. The veteran inched closer, ostensibly adjusting his position to monitor the entire lobby, but his attention remained fixed on the confrontation. His hand unconsciously drifted toward his hip, a habit from his military days, though he carried no weapon in this civilian role. Something about the woman's demeanor struck him as unusual. Not the typical nervousness of someone being accused, but the steady calm of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Perhaps," Angela finally spoke, her voice measured and clear, "you could explain which specific aspects of my application you find problematic." She gestured toward the documents John was still brandishing like evidence of wrongdoing. The manager scoffed, slapping the papers down on his desk. "The entire thing is problematic. The numbers don't add up for someone like—" He caught himself, glancing around at the watching customers before finishing, "for someone with your background." Michael took another step forward, positioning himself within earshot, but maintaining a professional distance. He'd been trained to read rooms, to sense when intervention might become necessary. The security guard noted how several customers had stopped their banking activities entirely. All attention now focused on the unfolding drama at the manager's desk. The marble floor reflected the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, casting everyone in harsh relief, like actors on an illuminated stage, with an increasingly engaged audience watching their every move. John Smith stood up, straightening his designer tie as he made his announcement to the entire lobby. "I believe we need to involve the authorities," he declared, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "We've had too many incidents with false documents lately, and I can't risk the bank's security." Dr. Angela Brown sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the black leather portfolio containing all her documentation. The bank manager's words hung in the air, creating a ripple of uncomfortable murmurs among the customers. On the other side of the lobby, 17-year-old Zoe Johnson kept her smartphone steady, capturing every moment of the confrontation. The live stream's viewer count surged past 3,000, then nearly 4,000 in minutes. Comments flooded the screen faster than anyone could read them. "Is this really happening in 2023? One viewer typed. "Someone needs to be fired today," wrote another. "This is why I closed my account with them last year," a third comment appeared. The high schooler zoomed in slightly, making sure to capture both the manager's smug expression and Angela's remarkable composure. Zoe couldn't believe what she was witnessing, discrimination happening in real time, right before her eyes. Angela remained unmoved by the spectacle unfolding around her. Her patience seemed almost supernatural to those watching. Most people would have stormed out in anger or broken down in tears when faced with such public humiliation, but the compliance officer sat calmly, like a seasoned traveler waiting for a delayed flight at an airport terminal. Behind the bulletproof glass, Maria Davis watched with growing discomfort. The young teller's hands trembled slightly as she counted bills for a customer, her attention divided between her task and the drama unfolding just yards away. She caught Michael Brown's eye. The security guard had positioned himself closer to Angela's chair, his military training evident in his alert stance and watchful gaze. Mrs. Helen Miller, who had been filling out deposit slips at the writing counter, set down her pen. The elderly customer's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval as she observed John's behavior. I'm simply following protocol, John added, glancing around for support that wasn't forthcoming. The integrity of this institution is my responsibility. Angela checked her watch, a subtle, elegant timepiece that contradicted John's assumptions about her financial status. She hadn't raised her voice once, hadn't shown a single crack in her professional demeanor. Her calm was more unnerving than any outburst could have been, and everyone in the lobby could sense it. Everyone except John Smith, who remained oblivious to the storm he was creating. John Smith reached for the phone with a performative flourish, making sure everyone in the lobby could see him taking action. His fingers stabbed at the keypad as he maintained unwavering eye contact with Dr. Angela Brown. The call connected quickly, and he spoke with practiced authority. Yes, this is John Smith, manager at American Community Bank downtown. We have a suspicious individual refusing to leave after a loan denial. Possible financial fraud attempt. He paused, listening briefly. Black female, approximately 40, won't accept our decision. Another pause. Yes, thank you. We'll be waiting. The marble-floored lobby fell into uncomfortable silence as he placed the receiver down with deliberate slowness. Several customers shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. The tension in the air was palpable, like static electricity before a storm. Officers will be here in 10 minutes, John announced loudly, straightening his silk tie. I suggest you wait quietly until they arrive. His voice carried across the space, ensuring everyone heard his declaration of authority. Angela calmly collected her documents from the desk, sliding them back into her black leather portfolio with methodical precision. Not a single paper was out of place. Not a single movement betrayed anxiety. She closed the portfolio with a soft click that somehow commanded more attention than John's theatrical phone call. Are you certain that's your best option? She asked, her voice steady and measured. There was no pleading in her tone, no desperation, only a question that hung in the air like an unspoken warning. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across the manager's face. Something in her composure gave him pause. People facing arrest typically didn't remain this calm. His eyes darted to the growing number of onlookers, many with phones partially concealed in their hands. Michael Brown, the security guard, had positioned himself closer to the desk, his expression unreadable but his posture alert. Zoe Johnson's impromptu broadcast had garnered over 5,000 viewers in just 15 minutes, with local news stations already picking up screenshots. Hashtags like Banking While Black and Chicago Bank Shame were trending across the city, each notification lighting up phones throughout the marble-floored lobby. Behind her bulletproof glass, Maria Davis watched the scene unfold with growing dread. Her palms were slick with sweat as she counted the minutes until her shift ended. The 24-year-old had only been working at American Community Bank for 7 months. This job paid her rent and student loans, yet something about the quiet dignity of the woman facing John's barrage made her stomach twist with shame. This isn't right, Maria whispered to Robert Johnson, who stood nervously arranging deposit slips at the counter beside her. She's just applying for a loan. I've seen white businessmen treated completely differently for smaller amounts. Robert glanced anxiously toward John's desk, then back at Maria. His tie seemed suddenly too tight as he tugged at his collar. John knows what he's doing, he muttered, his voice barely audible. We can't interfere. Remember what happened to Diane when she questioned his methods. The assistant manager shuffled papers unnecessarily, avoiding eye contact with the customers who were now openly staring at the confrontation. Besides, he added, it's not our department. Loan approvals are his jurisdiction. Across the lobby, Mrs. Helen Miller had stopped pretending to fill out her deposit slip. The elderly woman, who had maintained accounts at this branch since before Robert was born, kept looking between her checkbook and the unfolding scene, her disapproval evident in the tight line of her mouth. Maria caught Mrs. Miller's eye, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared recognition of the injustice playing out before them. The older woman gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging their silent alliance. The pressure to act was mounting with each second. Maria's finger hovered over the internal phone line to the regional manager. One call could change everything, or cost her the job she desperately needed. Through the glass, she could see comments flooding Zoe's live stream. Someone do something, and where are the other employees? Robert noticed her hesitation. Don't, he whispered. It's not worth it. But as Dr. Brown sat with perfect composure while John continued his tirade, Maria felt something shift inside her. The weight of inaction was becoming heavier than the risk of speaking up. Miss Helen Miller, who'd banked with American Community Bank for 41 years, finally stood up from her chair near the deposit slips counter. Her pearl necklace caught the fluorescent lighting as she straightened her back with the dignity that came from decades of respect in this very institution. "Excuse me, young man," she called across the lobby, her voice carrying with surprising strength for someone her age. "I've been a customer here since 1983. Can you explain why you're treating this woman like a criminal?" The marble-floored lobby fell silent. Even Zoe paused her commentary on the live stream, letting Mrs. Miller's words hang in the air uninterrupted. The elderly woman's handbag dangled from her forearm as she took 3 deliberate steps toward John's desk. John Smith shifted immediately, his demeanor transforming. The manager's face, previously hardened with suspicion toward Angela, softened into a placating smile. He recognized the weight of a wealthy, influential customer, someone whose investment portfolio he personally managed, and whose referrals had brought substantial business to the branch. "Miss Miller," he began, his voice honeyed with respect that had been notably absent moments before. "I appreciate your concern, but this is a security matter. We have protocols." "Protocols?" the elderly woman interrupted, glancing around at the gathering crowd of customers. "I've never seen these protocols applied to anyone who looks like you or me." Her hand gestured between herself and the manager, the implication crystal clear to everyone watching. Robert Johnson, the assistant manager, hovered nervously by the loan desk, his eyes darting between his superior and the influential customer. The tension in his shoulders betrayed his discomfort with the entire situation. Angela Brown remained seated, her composure unbroken despite the drama unfolding around her. She placed her hand gently on the leather portfolio before her and looked up at Mrs. Miller with genuine appreciation. "I appreciate your support," Angela said softly, "but I can handle this." Her voice carried no anger, no indignation, just quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space between the desks. Mrs. Miller hesitated, her hand clutching her purse strap tighter. "Are you certain, dear? This isn't right." "I'm certain," Angela replied with a subtle nod. The elderly woman reluctantly returned to her seat, but her eyes remained fixed on John, watchful and judgmental. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, emboldened by Mrs. Miller's stand but uncertain how to proceed. Michael, the security guard, adjusted his position near the entrance, his military training evident in his alert posture as he assessed the escalating situation. John cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the narrative that was quickly slipping away from him. The tension in the lobby thickened like morning fog over Lake Michigan. John Smith stood with his shoulders squared, attempting to reclaim the authority that was rapidly slipping through his fingers. Customers who had been silently observing now exchanged glances of disapproval, their loyalty to the institution visibly wavering. "We have a responsibility to protect against fraud," John insisted, his voice carrying across the marble floor. "These procedures exist for everyone's protection." He gestured broadly, as if including all present in his crusade against financial crime. But the crowd was no longer on his side. Mrs. Helen Miller, her silver hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows, shook her head in visible disapproval. Maria Davis watched nervously from behind her teller window, her fingers fidgeting with a stack of deposit slips. Even Robert Johnson, usually John's reliable echo, had retreated a step back, creating physical distance from the situation. "I understand bank protocols," Angela Brown replied, her voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of authority that made several customers turn their heads. "But protocol also requires you to actually review documentation before making determinations." She reached for her black leather portfolio, the material gleaming under the bank's overhead lights. With deliberate movements, Angela opened the portfolio on John's desk. "Mr. Smith, you haven't actually reviewed my documentation," she stated, "not as a question, but as fact. Perhaps we should start there." John's face reddened like a Chicago sunset, the flush creeping from his collar to his hairline. Sweat beaded at his temples as he became acutely aware of the dozen pairs of eyes fixed on him. Michael Brown, the security guard, shifted his position slightly, moving closer to the desk with the practiced vigilance of his military training. John began, but words failed him momentarily. He glanced at the documents now visible in the open portfolio, pristine and official-looking. The manager tugged at his tie, suddenly too tight around his neck. Zoe Johnson, her phone still recording, zoomed in slightly on the interaction. The comments on her livestream scrolled faster now. He didn't even look at her papers. Classic profiling. What happens next? The customers in the lobby leaned forward almost in unison, waiting for John's reply. The bank's usual afternoon hum had fallen to complete silence. Even the usual clicking of keyboards and shuffling of papers had ceased. The only sound was the soft whir of the climate control system and the barely audible ping of notifications from Zoe's phone. John cleared his throat, reaching reluctantly for the portfolio. "Fine," he said, his voice strained. "Let's see what you have." "Fine. But don't blame me when the police find discrepancies," John Smith declared with a final attempt at authority, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. He extended his hand with obvious reluctance, as if touching something distasteful. Angela Brown handed over her black leather portfolio without hesitation. The tension in the lobby was palpable as customers watched the exchange, many still recording on their phones. Zoe Johnson's livestream counter continued to climb, comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them. John began leafing through the documents with theatrical skepticism, clearly expecting to find amateur forgeries or inconsistencies. His expression shifted gradually from smug certainty to confusion, then to unmistakable shock. The color drained from his face as he turned each page. The portfolio contained federal employment verification on official letterhead, complete with watermarks and security features that even John, with all his banking experience, recognized as authentic. Investment statements revealed liquid assets exceeding $4 million, spread across multiple high-profile financial institutions. Business credit reports showed perfect ratings with commentary from major credit bureaus praising exceptional financial management. Most damning of all were letters of recommendation from government officials, names John instantly recognized from national news. One bore the signature of Treasury Secretary Lee, another from the Federal Reserve Chair herself. John's voice trailed off as his hands began to tremble visibly. He glanced up at Angela, who remained perfectly composed, then back at the documents that shattered every assumption he'd made. Michael Brown, the security guard, shifted his stance slightly, his military training allowing him to read the situation with precision. He'd been right about Angela's quiet authority. It wasn't just confidence, it was legitimate power. Across the lobby, Maria Davis watched from behind her telewindow, her earlier discomfort now mixed with a strange satisfaction. Mrs. Helen Miller nodded slightly, as if confirming something she'd suspected all along. "Is there a problem with my documentation?" Angela asked, her voice measured and professional. John swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the sweat beading on his forehead. The realization was setting in that he had not only misjudged this woman, but had done so spectacularly and publicly. The documents in his trembling hands weren't just legitimate, they represented connections and authority far beyond his own. "I'll need to verify these," he managed to say, though they both knew he was stalling. "Of course," Angela replied calmly. "Due diligence is important in banking." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on anyone in the room. John's earlier bravado had evaporated completely as he faced the devastating reality that his judgment, the very skill he prided himself on, had catastrophically failed him. John's phone vibrated against his hip, the regional manager's name flashing across the screen. His stomach tightened as he answered, stepping away from his desk with a forced smile toward the customers. "Susan Miller is absolutely livid," he thought, as her voice crackled through the speaker. "What in God's name is happening at your branch, John?" Susan's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "My phone has been exploding with complaints about some racist incident. There's a live stream going viral right now showing one of our managers harassing a black customer." John Smith's collar suddenly felt 2 sizes too small. "It's a misunderstanding, Susan. We have protocols for suspicious loan applications." "Suspicious?" Susan interrupted. "I'm looking at comments calling for your termination. People are tagging our corporate accounts, the mayor's office, and civil rights organizations." I was simply following. Fix this immediately. The regional manager's voice left no room for debate. Whatever you did, undo it. Apologize. Do damage control. I'm calling legal, and I'll be there within the hour. The call ended abruptly, leaving John standing alone, acutely aware of the eyes watching him from across the lobby. Zoe Johnson's phone remained pointed in his direction, the red recording light a tiny beacon of his impending downfall. He returned to his desk where Dr. Angela Brown sat reviewing her documents with methodical precision. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, organizing papers as though this were a routine business meeting rather than a public humiliation. The leather portfolio lay open, revealing glimpses of official letterheads and government seals. Angela's smartphone buzzed on the desk, the screen illuminated with FBI Special Agent Carter for the third time. Without breaking her rhythm or looking up from her papers, she declined the call with a casual swipe of her finger. John watched this interaction with growing unease. The casual dismissal of an FBI call suggested connections far beyond what he'd imagined. The sweat beaded along his hairline as he tried to process what was happening. "Ms. Brown," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "Dr. Brown," she corrected him, finally looking up. "Dr. Brown," he repeated, struggling to regain his composure. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in my private office." The bank manager gestured toward a door behind his desk, desperate to escape the public scrutiny. The murmurs from customers had grown louder. Miss Miller was speaking animatedly with Maria Davis at the teller window, both women shooting disapproving glances his way. Angela closed her portfolio deliberately. "I believe we're fine right here, Mr. Smith. After all, you seemed quite comfortable discussing my application publicly earlier. Why change venues now?" Her calm confidence made John's authority evaporate like morning dew under a harsh sun. He tugged at his tie, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. John Smith's fingers trembled as he shuffled through Dr. Angela Brown's impeccable documentation. The pristine papers before him told a story completely at odds with his assumptions, and the growing audience of bank customers watching his every move only heightened his discomfort. "These documents will need verification," John said, his voice noticeably shaky as sweat beaded along his hairline. He attempted to regain his composure, straightening his tie with a nervous tug. Angela calmly gathered her papers, arranging them neatly in her black leather portfolio. "Shall I call Treasury Secretary Lee, or would you prefer normal channels?" she replied coolly, her tone measured and professional. The bank manager's face drained of color at the mention of a government official so far above his pay grade. His mouth opened and closed twice before he managed to speak. That won't be necessary," he stammered, suddenly aware of how drastically the power dynamic had shifted. The lobby had grown eerily quiet, with every customer watching the scene unfold. Across the room, Maria Davis observed from behind her teller window, her hands frozen mid-count over a stack of $20 bills. The young woman exchanged a meaningful glance with Mrs. Miller, who nodded slightly in approval at the turn of events. The heavy glass doors of American Community Bank swung open with a soft whoosh, drawing all eyes to the entrance. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside, their badges catching the afternoon light. Officer Martinez, a seasoned 10-year veteran with salt and pepper hair, led the way. Behind him followed Officer Williams, a rookie whose freshly pressed uniform betrayed his recent graduation from the academy. The security guard, Michael Brown, straightened his posture instinctively at the sight of fellow law enforcement. His military training kicked in as he assessed the situation, his eyes darting between the officers and Angela. "That would be the police you called," Angela noted, her calm demeanor unbroken as she closed her portfolio with a soft snap. The officers approached the desk with measured steps, their presence commanding immediate attention. Every customer in the lobby watched in tense silence, including 17-year-old Zoe Johnson, who continued to capture everything on her smartphone from her position near the pamphlet display. "Are you the manager who called in the report?" Officer Martinez asked, his experienced eyes quickly scanning the scene before him. John nodded stiffly, his earlier confidence evaporate. Robert Johnson, the assistant manager, hovered nervously behind his superior, looking as though he wished to disappear into the polished marble floor. "Yes, that would be me," John confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper as the officers drew closer, completely unaware of how dramatically this encounter was about to change his life. "We received a fraud report," Officer Martinez began, his experienced eyes scanning the tense bank lobby. The 10-year police veteran stood with perfect posture, one hand resting near his belt as he assessed the situation. John Smith gestured toward Dr. Angela Brown with a trembling hand, his earlier confidence evaporating under the weight of public scrutiny. This woman insisted on having her application reviewed, despite obvious discrepancies, he claimed, voice cracking slightly. "I was simply following protocol for suspicious financial activity." The manager's explanation sounded hollow even to his own ears. The words hung awkwardly in the air, as Zoe's livestream captured every uncomfortable second, comments flooding in faster than viewers could read them. Officer Williams, still in his rookie year and more attuned to the social dynamics at play, eyed the stack of official documents spread across the desk. The young officer's gaze shifted between the papers and Angela, who remained composed despite the circus unfolding around her. "So, let me get this straight," Officer Williams said, his tone measured but skeptical. "You called the police because she wanted her loan application reviewed." He gestured toward the documents with their official letterheads and seals. "These don't look like forgeries to me." The live stream erupted with outrage, as viewers shared and commented furiously. "This is happening right now at American Community Bank downtown," one comment scrolled by, followed by dozens more demanding justice. John's face flushed crimson as the absurdity of his situation dawned on him. The manager loosened his tie slightly, suddenly aware of how the entire scene would appear to outsiders and to his superiors. Behind him, Robert Johnson took a small step backward, physically distancing himself from his boss's decisions. "There were irregularities," John insisted, but his voice had lost all authority. The amount she requested was unusual for someone with her background. Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Her background?" The security guard, Michael Brown, moved closer to the desk, his military training evident in his alert stance. His eyes met Angela's briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Maria watched from behind her teller window, phone clutched tightly in her hand. She'd already texted the branch's regional manager about the unfolding disaster. Mrs. Miller, the elderly customer who had banked there since 1983, shook her head disapprovingly. "I've never seen such treatment in all my years," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. John looked around desperately, suddenly aware that every person in the lobby, customers, employees, and now law enforcement, were witnessing his spectacular fall from authority. The digital clock above the tellers now read 3:23 p.m., each passing minute bringing him closer to a reckoning he never saw coming. Angela stood, moving with deliberate grace. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding." She opened her wallet and produced federal credentials. "Angela Brown, Senior Compliance Officer, Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago." The silence was absolute. Officer Martinez examined the badge, his tone shifting instantly to respect. "Ma'am, I apologize. May I ask why you're here?" The entire lobby seemed frozen in time. John Smith's face drained of color as he stared at the credentials in Officer Martinez's hands. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words emerged. The authority he had wielded so confidently moments ago evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. "This is impossible," he finally managed to stammer. "You can't just—" "I can, and I did," Angela replied calmly. Her voice carried throughout the hushed space without her having to raise it. Federal compliance investigations often require anonymity to ensure authentic interactions. Officer Williams, the rookie, straightened his posture instinctively. His training had covered federal authorities, but facing one in this context left him visibly impressed. "We apologize for the interruption, ma'am." From her position behind the bulletproof glass, Maria Davis watched with wide eyes, her hand covering her mouth. The teller had sensed something was wrong from the beginning, but this revelation exceeded anything she could have imagined. Helen Miller, the elderly customer who had stood up for Angela earlier, nodded with quiet satisfaction. "I knew there was something special about you, dear," she said, her voice carrying across the lobby. Zoe Johnson's livestream continued, capturing everything, her commentary now a breathless whisper. "Oh my God, she's Federal Reserve. Everyone seeing this, the security guard, Michael Brown, moved closer, recognition dawning in his eye. "I thought I recognized you from last year's financial security conference, Dr. Brown. You gave the keynote on institutional accountability." Robert Johnson, the assistant manager, hovered anxiously behind his superior, looking as though he wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. These officers responded to a call about potential fraud. Angela explained to the room, her tone measured and professional. "But the only questionable activity happening here today has been the systematic discrimination in lending practices." She turned back to John, whose arrogance had dissolved into naked fear. "Your branch has shown a pattern of loan rejections to qualified minority applicants at 17 times the rate of white applicants with identical qualifications." Officer Martinez nodded respectfully. "We'll step aside and let you continue your work, ma'am, unless you need our assistance." "That won't be necessary," Angela replied. "But I would appreciate if you'd remain for just a few more minutes. There are additional federal agents arriving who may need to speak with you. I'm conducting an unannounced compliance investigation into discrimination complaints against this branch," Dr. Angela Brown stated, her voice firm yet measured. "Mr. Smith has been under federal observation for 41 minutes. The revelation struck the lobby like a thunderclap. Every eye widened, and a collective gasp rippled through the space. John's face drained of color as he gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. The manager looked as though the marble floor beneath him had suddenly disappeared. "This branch has received 17 discrimination complaints in the past quarter alone," Angela continued, maintaining perfect composure. "The Federal Reserve takes these allegations extremely serious." She reached into a leather portfolio and revealed a small, sophisticated recording device and miniature camera. "Every interaction that occurred here today has been documented for a federal civil rights investigation." Her words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. John stumbled backward, nearly collapsing into his chair. "I was just following protocol," he stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "We have procedures for loan applications, procedures that apparently differ based on the applicant's appearance," Angela asked, her question cutting through his excuse like a knife. She turned toward the officers, who now stood at attention. "Officers Martinez and Williams, thank you for responding. Your conduct will also be noted in my report." Maria, watching from behind her teller window, pressed a hand to her mouth. Robert Johnson stood frozen, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by naked fear. Mrs. Miller nodded with satisfaction, her suspicions confirmed. Zoe's livestream comment section exploded with reactions. The teenager kept her phone steady, capturing every second of the unfolding revelation. "Are you seeing this?" she whispered to her audience, now numbering in the thousands. Michael, the security guard, moved closer to Angela, his military training kicking in as he positioned himself protectively near her. He'd recognized authority when he saw it, even when others had failed. "The Federal Reserve has been monitoring lending practices across Chicago," Angela explained, addressing everyone in the lobby. "What happened today is unfortunately not isolated." She turned back to John, whose professional demeanor had completely crumbled. "Your actions and words have been transmitted in real time to our compliance team downtown." The bank manager's eyes darted around the room, taking in the phones recording him, the witnesses watching in stunned silence, and the federal credentials now visible in Angela's hand. "This investigation," she said, sliding her documentation back into her portfolio, "has just moved from routine compliance to a priority civil rights case." She checked her watch, and it's all happening live. Moments later, the bank doors opened again. Special Agent Marcus Carter strode in, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The federal agent's presence commanded immediate attention as he made his way across the marble floor. Without hesitation, he saluted Dr. Angela Brown in front of the stunned lobby. "Dr. Brown, ma'am, Financial Crimes Division." "Sorry for the delay," he announced, his voice carrying throughout the now silent space. John Smith's face drained of all color. The manager gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white with tension. The realization that he had been caught in a federal sting operation designed to expose discriminatory lending practices hit him with devastating force. "We've been monitoring this branch for 6 months, following multiple complaints," Angela explained, addressing everyone present. Her calm demeanor had transformed into authoritative confidence. Today's interaction will serve as key evidence in our ongoing investigation. On Zoe's livestream, viewer numbers had exploded past 50,000. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read them. The teenager's quick thinking had amplified what was meant to be a quiet federal investigation into a viral moment of accountability. Mrs. Miller approached Angela, extending her hand. "I've banked here for decades, but I've seen how they treat people who look different. Thank you for doing something about it." Maria Davis watched from behind her counter, a mixture of relief and vindication washing over her. The teller had witnessed similar incidents before but had never had the power to address them. Michael Brown, the security guard, nodded respectfully toward Angela. His military instincts had been right all along. There was something different about her composure under pressure. Agent Carter turned to Officers Martinez and Williams. "We'll take it from here. Thank you for your assistance." The police officers nodded, understanding they had unwittingly become part of a much larger operation. Robert Johnson, the assistant manager, stood frozen in place, his career prospects flashing before his eyes. Unlike his superior, he might still have a chance to salvage his position if he cooperated fully. Within 24 hours, John's actions were broadcast on national news network. By week's end, the regional director issued a public apology, announcing mandatory sensitivity training for all branches and the creation of a new oversight committee. 3 months later, Angela stood before Congress, testifying about systemic discrimination in banking. Her quiet courage, documented and live-streamed on that fateful day, had triggered sweeping reforms across the industry. The incident became a case study in banking schools nationwide.